Good evening, everybody. Going to give everyone about 15 seconds to settle in, including our star here. Good evening, welcome. I'm Ellen Moody. I'm a conservator of contemporary art in the collections department at the Getty Conservation Institute, or GCI. It's a great honor to introduce this event where we're celebrating the artist Alison Saar and the release of Alison Saar Found Spirit, the latest film in our Artist Dialogue series, a project I've been lucky to manage since I joined the GCI about 4 years ago. This series aims to show the many different forms contemporary art production can take and their implications for art conservation. In each of these films, let me try to advance a slide here. Los Angeles-based artists discuss their processes and reflect on their work's conservation and legacy. There are 11 so far, all available to watch on our YouTube channel, with unedited transcripts of the full artist interviews available upon request. Alison Saar's work engages with issues of gender, race, and spirituality. Primarily taking the form of the female figure, her sculptures, installations, paintings, and prints explore themes rooted in the African diaspora and the complexities of the human experience. Her work is accessible to a wide audience, especially those who can identify with stories of resilience, heritage, and identity. As the art critic Leah Ullman put it, Saar's work is personal, but so deeply informed by myth and history that its narratives become universal and inclusive. Alison grew up in LA and studied here too, earning her bachelor's degree from Scripps College and her MFA from Otis College of Art and Design. Both institutions have named her a distinguished alumna. Her work has been widely exhibited in solo and group shows across the country and globe, is held in major museum collections around the world, and has been commissioned for public spaces such as downtown LA, New York's Times Square, and most recently in Paris's Champs-Élysées Garden as the official 2024 Olympic sculpture. She's the recipient of numerous prestigious honors, too many to mention here, but they include the Guggenheim Foundation Award and fellowships for the National Endowment of the Arts. Alison comes from a long line of artists. Her mother is the renowned assemblage artist Betty Saar, and her father was the ceramicist and illustrator Richard Saar. Her children, too, are artists. Oh, yeah? We have Maddie here in the audience as well. Give it up for Maddie. This continuity reverberates with her artworks, which in their materials and themes draw from histories to address our present. Art conservation can similarly be described as an effort to bridge the past and present. Conservators strive to make the past materially accessible to audiences of today and of the future. Alison is no stranger to conservation. In addition to being an artist, her father was also an art conservator, and for a time, Alison worked with him on objects that came through his studio. Some of these objects were ceremonial and had accrued power and value through their age and use. Perhaps in part due to this experience, she accepts and in some cases celebrates changes to her own work brought on by time and interaction. The short film we're about to screen explores her philosophies about her work's longevity and provides an intimate look at her creative process. Following the film, Alison will be joined by Dr. Rochelle Revenc, the head of Conservation and Preservation at the Getty Research Institute, or GRI. Rochelle has dedicated a great deal of her career to working with contemporary artists. She was previously at the GCI, where she initiated the Artist Dialogue series, and had just begun working on Alison's film when she departed for her new role. She's authored many important conservation publications, including 2 books on contemporary artists and their materials and processes. And at the GRI, she's developed inspired programming around its collection, for example, study days that invite contemporary artists to be in dialogue with collection stewards to better understand and preserve their archives. Rochelle's insights and Alison's reflections will no doubt lead to a very rich discussion. And after their conversation, we'll have time for audience Q&A, both in person and virtual. For those of you joining online, feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A box on your screen. And for those of you here in the audience, we will have microphones and runners. After the event, we hope those who are here in person will join us for a reception, a glass of wine outside. And I just wanted to give a few thanks before we roll the film. I want to thank the GCI for its support of this project, specifically Stravula Galfumitsu, Head of Collections, Tom Lerner, Head of Science, and Tim Whalen, the GCI's Director. I'm also grateful to our talented videographer and editor, who's with us here tonight, Ava Porter, and also to Benjamin Figueroa, who oversaw sound and some of the film's photography as well. And thanks to my colleagues Kim Chen, Caitlin Ramirez, and Naomi Mayo, sorry Naomi, who've been working behind the scenes to make sure that this event runs as smoothly as possible. And lastly, I want to thank our AV specialists Paul Peters and Preston Simpson, who I'm about to ask to roll the film. We might let a couple people come in and find their seats first. And while they do that, please silence your phones and enjoy. Thank you.
Can you hear us? Yes, okay. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Alison. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And Alison, it's really an honor to be in conversation with you, so thank you. Before we jump in the conversation, I just want to say this movie is really special to me. First, because I admire Alison greatly as a person and as an artist, and also it was the last movie I did with the GCI, so I'm excited to see now Ellen, who introduced us, taking on the torch and continuing and taking the series to new heights, so thank you, Ellen. And then I'm just going to jump right in. So the movie is called Found Spirits, in alluding to the fact that, of course, you use found objects and also to the deep spirituality that emanates from your work. And I wonder if you could talk about this evocation of the spirit in your work and also how the materials convey that evocation.
You know, I think initially when I started thinking about that was, I was living in New York. I was 27, 28, and I mentioned these ceiling tin, which is the pattern, it's not really tin, but the pattern metal, and a lot of it that was being pulled up, it's not,
Who is that?
maybe we're not on. We did do a sound check, but it's...
Try again.
That sounds like it's happening. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
The sound police out there. Yeah, and I love that this ceiling tin, you know, was being pulled out in the 80s for renovations, and, you know, they would, like, sandblast the ceilings and all that. But it had been in these spaces, some of them from the turn of the century. And I love that, you know, it kind of, you know, back then, people were born in their tenement apartments. They, you know, died in their apartments. They had fish fries. They had rent parties. And I love that this material had this memory that I was too young to possess. And so for me, it was kind of a crutch in some sort of way to kind of like bring that history and have that support, which I kind of see as a sort of spirit thing. And I think also it really comes through, you know, having read Arnold Rubin, I think it was called, all right, Accumulation and Power. Someone knows the name of it. Power and Accumulation. Thank you. Yeah, oh, of course, Marla would know. And, you know, which is really talking about how these pieces exist, but they don't really take on their ferocity and their power until people are interacting with them, and whether that's through libations or whether it's through touch or a little bit of, you know, a little bit of booze here and there, they don't really come into their true power. And so I love this idea that these materials came already with this sort of power of having as witnesses, as bearing witness to what was going on. And so that really became an attraction for me, and hence, constantly gleaning flea markets to bring other stuff to that. But I loved the idea that it really kind of supported and a lot of the pieces thematically kind of dealt like that, as I mentioned, with the seed sacks and things like that, yeah.
I love that idea that the materials might have a memory that you don't have directly. But you use found objects, but we see you in the movie, you're getting in there, you're like hammering that metal and these nails, and you're really a hands-on artist.
I know, I'm glad they edited out all the thumb hits and all of that. And I'm sorry, because when my assistants is here, and maybe two of them, I'm not sure if the other one is here, but India, who oddly wasn't there the days that we were doing these pieces, but it's also really nice to have them here as part of that, and that I really want to thank them. And of course, my assistant Crumb, which is the dog that was sitting in the front. Oh, and Tom, my husband, also ran. But I am thankful for all of their contributions, either physically in the studio and my daughter, or just by support when I get home from the studio.
And so the video is based on a lengthy oral history that we did, and because of their relatively short format, not everything made its way into the movie. So something that I want to tease out that we had talked about that we did not have room for is your public sculpture practice, actually. So this is Salon, right, that was just inaugurated in France, and that's your Harriet Tubman memorial sculpture. We talked about so the fact that your public sculpture is the only part, you of course do the model, but then you delegate the actual fabrication. And we talked about the trade-off that comes from making something permanent. Maybe something's lost, but then it's in the public space, and it's for everyone to interact with. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think, part of that, this attraction to material that actually is, the thing that witnesses. But, in these, I was gathering found objects, and so they're kind of represented. They're there in spirit, even though they're not materially kind of historically older things. But yeah, and I think it's really wonderful to. I like that there's a community in making these public works. The piece that we made for Salon, Maddie came with me to France, and we made the clay model for it. And then it went, we were doing it in a foundry that's owned by a woman. It started by her family, and all these young, cute guys that were basically, came from the neighborhood that had been previously coal mining and stuff like that. So it was kind of really lovely to see that my art could then kind of turn around and support young artisans really learning and honing the fine craft. So that's, I think, beyond having the piece go out in the public, the piece is also, I think, kind of responsible for supporting other people and learning crafts and keeping those techniques alive.
Right, so it's more of there's a whole support, it's supporting a whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
How do you work with a foundry?
So normally I work with the foundry here in Los Angeles. I was working with, Harriet Tubman was done by a foundry called Decker Studios, and he retired, but Landon is who I work with now, and he actually worked with Sandy, so that was kind of a nice passover. But generally, I like working with them close by, so I can kind of go in and keep an eye on them and like light a match under their butt, sort of things. But and often they'll let me, like the really large pieces, like Tubman was way too big. You've seen my little studio, so it's nice to have like 14-foot tall ceilings or even taller to be able to build things that were just too big for my own space. So yeah, but it's nice, and it's. I don't know if anyone's seen bronze being cast. I never bore of it. I've been doing it for years and years, and it's just like, it's just the alchemy of it, this molten metal. It's so beautiful when it's being poured, and so I still get all goosebumpy around that.
And then with the Harriet Tubman sculpture, you said it was really embraced by the community, right? People touch it, leave things.
Initially, not so much. Initially, there was like 1,000-person petition to turn her around because they said, that I did not know anything about Black history because the Underground Railroad was north and she's facing south. And I'm like, this is not about the Underground Railroad. This is about Harriet Tubman. And why we value her was her compassion to go south again and again and again. So they came around, but... And the other thing was that she's right next to the police station. So if we turned her around, she would have been like going directly to jail. And I'm like, I'm not going to be the one that sends Harriet Tubman to jail. Are you crazy? So, but I love now that, you know, people talk about it. And, you know, and I think that dialogue was really healthy because people were like coming off the street hollering at me. And I said, well, let's have a conversation. We sit on the stoop and talk about it. And then, you know, now it's a place where I think they celebrate Harriet Tubman's birthday, or well, her death day. They don't know when she was born, with school groups every year. And then they also, I think someone sent a photo of the Women's Labor March being started there. So I love that it's become not just a piece of art that you walk by on your way to work, but a destination to come and gather and to, you know, meet new people and, you know, launching pad for other things, so.
Amazing. And it's really kind of staggering to see the difference in like the breadth of your work between very intimate scales, the prints where you say you started by having your cats walk around them, put your mug of coffee into it, to the fabricated sculpture, which are in a huge scale. How does that work for you? Like when...
You know, I think that as you can see, the hammering of the wood and those things is really labor intensive, and my hands start getting tired, and as I'm getting older, I'm starting to think, well, I need to come up with another system because eventually it'll be just really hard on the arthritis will kick in. But I like that you can kind of move from one thing to the next. Like the drawings I can do at home, and the printmaking I can start at home, and then I can work with print studios, which is similar to working with foundries, that it's a whole community. And that, yeah, just switching it up also keeps it fresh. Today, Maddie and I went through the decorative arts section of the Getty. I'm thinking about working in clay, and my daughter works in clay, so we're really excited about that. In fact, I need to call you up and get some, do some research at the Research Institute. But yeah, so that sort of thing, when you get a new idea and it kind of leads you in different directions, is really exciting as an artist. So
yeah.
Yeah.
You make it sound very exciting. I want to talk a little bit about, let's see, the skillet portraits of domestic workers. And you say some quite fascinating things in the movie. I find it very interesting, this tension between you, obviously no conservation, you're actually explaining it better than a conservator. And you're very mindful on one hand, but on the other hand, you say, well, this portrait, the paint might eventually really dissolve in the grease, and it's part of their life. And can you talk a little bit about this acceptance?
it's like a reverse pentimento where the image will get sucked back into the image instead of the under image coming up. Yeah, to just kind of be open. I think it's always complicated. You know, the artist has one idea as to what that lifespan should be, and the collector has a very different idea as to what the lifespan of a piece of art should be. So, you know, but I think because that's so thematically ingrained in this piece in terms of invisibility. I remember when I was, you know, working on these pieces at a studio in Maine as a residency, and someone wanted to go by. I said, oh yeah, just go in and let yourself in and look at the pieces. And they, you know, I saw them later and they said, yeah, I went in, but there weren't any works. There were just a bunch of skillets hanging on the wall. And like, she couldn't even see them. Like and I had to paint them like at, you know, between 11 and 1, because without really direct sunlight, it was really hard to see them. In fact, these photos are pretty good, even though they're still hard to see. So yeah, this idea that, that's very much a part of what these pieces are.
And so the portrait themselves, the people, are they real people that you're portraying?
No, they aren't. They're just kind of like, you know, people like, you know, I start painting them and they start taking on features. So they kind of present themselves to me. I'm really terrible at portraits, as it's obvious, evident in some pieces I've done. And, you know, it's just, yeah, I just like to let them kind of reveal themselves to me. And, you know, and I love these skillets. You can see the crustier, the better. So I love, you know, when they kind of take on that sort of crusty patina, and you know that someone's been cooking with them forever.
Right.
Like, you can't just buy a new skillet. And a lot of times they'll sell like old skillets that have been cleaned up. They're just like totally useless, because that's what you want, is all of that kind of history of grease on there. So.
You are a bit like an alchemist yourself, actually, because you take materials that already have a certain history and then you transform them further to give them new meaning, and right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah?
I guess that could be considered alchemy.
I also wanted to ask you, talking of conservation, but also the materials. So there's a quality in your work that I find it very poetic, but there's also defiance, and poetic defiance, maybe. And so just in terms of the materials, are the materials also defiant to you? Is that part of that?
I think in some respects there's a defiance or a resistance to kind of being market driven in terms of buying all these kind of like high-end materials and stuff like that. You know, these pieces were really informed by the quilt makers of Gee's Bend, and how they were taking, like, you know, now I think they're like stripping those jeans off of those teenagers before they wear them out, sort of thing, you know, to kind of have an essence of that family and that community in these materials, and then being recycled. So this one has like some denim on the sides, and then some seed sacks and stuff like that. And they were dyed with indigo, which is, talk about alchemy, that is so incredible. And because they're dyed with indigo, I mean, I don't know, I should ask a conservator, but, you know, they will fade. Anything that's dyed is going to fade anyhow. But, you know, I love that, you know, indigo is a material that was one of the 5 major planned industries of the enslavement in the United States and elsewhere. And so I love that it has this history of, you know, enslaved African Americans were brought here because they knew how to farm indigo, and that was part of their expertise, but then they were forced to kind of, so anyway, I love that whole history, and it's just magic. I don't know, if you put it in and it comes out like this kind of like brilliant yellow green. Oh, my mom has arrived. Better late than never. Hi. You, hi. Hi, Neil. Oh, it's fine. But yeah, so you pull it out and it's this light lime green, kind of like Mountain Dew. Now that Mountain Dew is such a big thing, Mountain Dew color. And then before your eyes, the oxygen in the air turns it blue. And it's just like, oh my God, this is magic. So I'm also really keen on that.
You do use a lot of these very deep blues in your work. Is there a particular meaning to that?
I think of it as, you know, you look at the spectrum, and blue to indigo to violet to ultraviolet, and when at the end of the spectrum it becomes invisible. That spectrum continues, but we don't see it, but it becomes a spirit spectrum to me. So, and you find it a lot in, you know, in indigos and cobalts and ultramarines, in Yoruba work and works throughout the African continent, and just the power or lapis, where you see it in other places. So it's a material that is, one, it's, I think, unique and magical in its scarcity, but it's also just, you look at it and it vibrates. That's why, you know, E. Klein would do those paintings, right? It's just like it makes your retinas jump, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's kind of taken us to the next level, sort of thing.
Beautiful. I did want to ask you as well about that dance between what you put in your work and the reception of it. You mentioned your work changed when you had children, and then you also mentioned that I may see your work when I'm 10, and then see it again when I'm 40, and then see it again when I'm 80, and it's not going to be the same. And then the context, the political, economical, social context around change. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I think about those really early works, when, you know, I think the first sort of work that kind of started touching on spirit and metaphysical was when my son Kyle was born. and this little kid comes out kind of fully formed and obviously has ideas about the world already in his mind, and the same with Maddie. And so, I think, that really set me off in kind of where did these spirits come from to come here and be part of that, and it kind of really made me believe in kind of like that these are not new souls, they're old souls. And that, so it kind of made some sort of spiritual connection for me. And, maybe some of that charm wore off. I see those pieces differently now, when some 30, 35 years later. But no, I'm just saying that because she's here. but I think as I mature and learn about things and see things differently, they take on different meanings for me. Hold on, I get a gulp of water.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I hope that work, I think that's what's interesting about art. Even when you go see things in museums, there might be a painting that you've seen, and also a tanner that you've seen 20 times over, but every time you see it, it reveals something new to you. And I think that's what's really beautiful about art as opposed to illustration, and, that has this power to evoke things out of you that you never knew you had.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Actually, have you had your work conserved already? Is that something? Oh, yeah.
Sometimes by myself.
Okay.
And when I was talking about the tin rusting out, there was a piece. I think when you had that, the shots in that gallery were from the show Ether and Earth, that when it was in Pomona, at Pomona College, and there was a piece that a collector who lived by the beach, and would open their windows, and you get that lovely salt air, which is not really the best thing for rusting tin. So where it had been rusted out, I said, oh yeah, I'll just patch it up. So we patched it up. And I know that, sometimes if it's beyond my means, then other folks will fix it. But I like that, when I think one of the ones where we was panning down one of the female figures, that was a painting on found materials. Part of it was like an old cot, like what would have been used in, encampments. And, it's frayed at the end, and that's just going to continue to fray and fall apart. Those threads, they're cotton, but they'll eventually completely disintegrate, sort of thing. And I like that, but, again, like I said, collectors don't necessarily agree with that.
But at some level, they must love it, though, because this is your work. That's the essence of it.
Sure, if I point out that that's my intention, so it doesn't do much for the resale value, I should say. But that's not what it's about, right?
No, art. But since we were joined by Betty, thank you, Betty.
Yes.
Applause for Betty. You speak very eloquently in the movie about growing up in Laurel Canyon and this artistic environment of musicians, artists, all the Betty, of course, but others as well. Your father, Noah Purefoy, Susan Jackson. I mean, what an amazing time and place to grow up in. Yeah,
well, those guys weren't necessary. I think we were the lone folks in Laurel Canyon, but we would definitely go down to Leimert Park and down to Watts and connect with those artists there. Suzanne Jackson, we're south of Pico, and all of that. So those were all kind of part of my mother's art community and stuff like that. And it was pretty incredible to just, even if we weren't necessarily understanding it. I mean, we used to love going openings and drinking all of the wine glasses, emptying all the wine glasses left underneath the table, sort of thing. Leslie was part to that, but but I think you could just kind of absorb some of that, and then being around those amazing artists like David Hammonds and John Outerbridge and Betty Saar and Suzanne Jackson and Marion Hassinger, which it's just was a really rich. Right. Environment, and I'm just so thrilled. I mean, sadly, many of them have passed, but even those that have kind of transitioned, I really love that they're being celebrated so much now, long overdue. Yeah. I should also mention Samela Lewis. Her son's in the audience tonight, but she was my mentor at Scripps College, and she was also aside from being a really amazing artist in herself, in her own right, she was also keenly supportive and responsible for showing. I think one of my mother's first shows was with her too, so that was also a really important part of that community, that they were not being shown outside of that, and so these, Brockman Gallery and Suzanne Jackson's gallery and Samella's museum and gallery were the only places where many of these artists could be shown, so it was really an important community in that respect, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm delighted that Samela Louis' son is in the audience. I know my colleagues at the GRI, Christine Juarez and Lauren Brooks, are doing a project on Samela and want to talk to you very much about her as an educator. So
Okay, give me a call.
to be continued. And it's just also amazing to see that thread clearly in your work, like you talk about the Rodia Towers and the What's Uprising, and just seeing that you say, I think, rising from the rubble. So here's this idea of defiance again, of rising up to become something else, or to
this
resist.
notion that they made these incredible pieces from what was basically their community destroyed, sort of thing, and that it was just like, wow, what a way to kind of strike back, to say, yeah, this is, the result of this, and, we're going to take this and do something else with it and recreate it, constantly making things out of that. So I think it was really a brave and beautiful movement.
Yeah, thank you. But how are we doing on time? We're going to soon start taking questions from the audience. I had one last question that I'm very interested in. Talking about all these incredible environments, did you have a moment that you were like, this is what I want to do, I want to be an artist, or did you just organically, where you were just into it and it just was obvious?
I resisted it for a long time. I think you don't want to do what your parents are doing, sort of thing. And I remember in high school, I was like showing my work to my art teacher, and all he wanted to do was talk about Betty and her NEA and all that stuff. And it was kind of like, it felt like it was a big shadow to kind of crawl out from under. And I think, Leslie as well. And then it just felt like, so I wanted to be an art historian, and that's where I connected with Samela, Dr. Lewis at Scripps College, and actually another colleague, Francine, is in the audience as well. We studied together, and I wanted to write about this work, but then I realized I was not really great with facts, and I liked inventing and making stuff up, which unfortunately is not embraced by the historical community. So, I just was better at making stuff. And so I kind of just succumbed to it. And, I quickly realized I was not really good at anything else. I think I was a waitress for maybe 5 hours before I got fired. So, it was just kind of no choice. And I hope my children feel like they have a choice, but they have followed suit. And my husband's also an artist, so it's kind of hard to get out, hard to escape.
That sounds like a very long 5 hours of waitressing.
It was. The chef cut his hand, they were bleeding, just like, it was intense.
But it's wonderful to have this kind of family where you can have a really very successful, very important artist and still have room for yourself to also become very successful, very important, and the same going forward. So I think it's really a testament to something very special going on here.
I guess, I hope so. I mean, I don't think any of us went out and pursued it to be famous and to have I really feel thankful and blessed for the career that I've got. But that was never sort of the incentive to go out and do that. And early on, we saw that there were hard times as being an artist. We had our tough moments, Mom, and luckily we always had a home and stuff like that. But it was not always, lots of dough or anything. And so we didn't kind of have that sort of mythology about it, which I think a lot of young artists now do go into the art world thinking they're going to be, making millions of dollars on their first paintings, which many of them are. Not to diss that, I mean, that'd be great, but, that wasn't even a reality, I think, when I was coming up. And we just do it because it's what keeps us going.
You have to. Yeah, you do it because you have to.
What we're passionate and what we love. And
wonderful. Thank you, Alison. We're going to take questions from the audience now. Oh,
Okay. Oh, there
yep.
we go. Okay.
Just two questions
Thank you.
here.
Hi.
Hello.
I was just curious with a piece as high profile as the Olympic piece, how much, I don't want to use the word interference, but were you just given complete free rein, or were they?
So it kind of came about, I guess they had gotten a short list together, and I got a phone call, and it was kind of like, it's just like a prank. But, and thankfully they weren't asking me to make something sporty because I have basically zero interest in sports. So I shouldn't say zero. I like watching baseball and stuff like that, but, I wasn't really, and I have done some sport figures, but they were always about, like Jesse Owens, or always about, again, how, Black athletes were not given the same opportunities as others. So, but they were, they pointed to just Coubertin, the beginning of Olympics, and his ideas behind it, and this idea of kind of creating a community of excellence and all of that, and that I could embrace. And so, I created this piece that, it has some of the Olympic tropes. She's holding the torch, which I didn't really see as the Olympic torch so much as sort of inspiration and the spark of creativity and illumination. And then she's also holding a bough of olive branches, which I think was also kind of more about a comment on what's happening in the world today than necessarily the Olympics traditions of that. But she's surrounded by these chairs, and the idea that this, again, is not a piece that you kind of just stroll by, but that you come and you sit down and meet people and share ideas and create poetries or songs or whatnot. And so it's really a destination than it is a sculpture. And yeah, they fell for it, so. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. And I want to talk about Harriet Tubman, because we live right next to it. And I don't know if you know that next to it was a abandoned gas station. I think at the time you installed it, right, on St. Nicholas. And that's now a luxury apartment building with a grocery store, supermarket right below it. And so I go there every day, and I see pretty much every day at least a small, very often also a larger group of people standing around the sculpture and discussing the sculpture. So it's certainly a landmark in Harlem. And it's beautiful to look at it and to see that it, like you said, it really gets attention. And I always wondered about the skirt and the ghosts in the skirt, and there's shoe prints, I believe, and other signs. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because when now I saw your skillets and the faces in the fabric, and they look always like very deep in the depth. There's depth in the material.
Right. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of, I didn't want to necessarily, and I know there's other depictions of Harriet Tubman actually leading people, but I really wanted to kind of talk about her passengers as these sort of things that are kind of like enveloped in her skirt. So it's kind of like the spirits of those that she's led to freedom as she goes back down south. And her little petticoat, which, is kind of funny because it's always kind of this sort of feminine, ultra feminine, silliness, is shaped like a cattle catcher in the front of a train. So she's just kind of, and she's literally, traffic is coming up and she's parting traffic. So I love this idea that she's just kind of like going against the stream. And then the roots really kind of represent how she herself kind of uprooted herself. She left her family without telling her spouse or anything that she was running away. But also to kind of just talk about her role in uprooting slavery altogether. And then, I think most of us know from elementary school, and of course that's now threatened with Black history being banned in schools. But, you know, we knew of her as the conductor of the Underground Railroad, but there was so much we didn't know about her that, you know, she had been injured very young by a slave foreman, and she was prone to fits of epilepsy, so she was doing all of this with that. And so each of these, there's these little tiles that are around, and those are kind of a pictorial history of her life. And it was really important for me to make that pictorial because she was illiterate, and I wanted her to tell her story in images. And they're also kind of based, kind of giving a nod to Harriet Jacobs, who was a enslaved or emancipated quilt maker who makes these really incredible quilts, which I think a couple of them are in the National Gallery. So anyway, I wanted to tell that story, and it's also great that the idea was that kids could come and do rubbings and create a book of her and then kind of write the actual text to it. So I don't know if that's ever happened. I know school kids go there a lot, but yeah, so trying to build into these sculptures ways for people to interact and to be able to take things away from it. Thank you for asking.
Just want to say that I think maybe the legacy of your family is this idea of making process and community at each juncture. So you are doing process, but you're also trying to figure out a way to include process. I'm thinking of I don't remember the book that you did with Betty where there was a page in the back and people sent it in, and it was just to incorporate these ideas that you organically had as a child and grew into, whether you resented it, but then you finally grew into it, and now it's become your work, and that's something that Betty did too, and that's, I think, one of the most amazing things, even more amazing than the art, and it's ridiculous and sounds heretical to say that, but that open-ended encouragement of process, not just the techniques, but the actual human context. That's what's so remarkable. And then I just want to say, I know I mentioned to you earlier, I love this very, very early show you did, The Tattooed Lady, and I'm just curious what the narrative was when you were making that, what you were saying about it.
Yeah, that was a really early series of drawing collages I had done, and that was the case of the Stonehenge paper that I had to tear and, you know, mess up before I could actually start drawing it in really early, probably like the first or second year that I moved to New York. I was kind of looking at, you know, sort of sideshow posters, but also the way Saji Bartman, better known as the Hottentot Venus, was being presented and exposed and exhibited as this exotic body. And so these are people that are kind of on these banners. They're life-size, but they're kind of sort of being presented as oddity or otherness, and kind of talking at once about their vulnerability, but also in their strength and their inner strength. And I think that's when I started doing these figures without eyes, because for me, that was a defense for them, that you are looking at them, but they are not going to return that gaze, that you are invisible to them, if that makes sense. And I think it also comes out of mask and masquerading and my interest in my connections with studying with Samela and looking at traditional arts of Africa and the African diaspora. But yeah, so that's kind of what those were about. And they had like little, it looked like a mosaic, but if you look closely, there would be lots of images torn from dictionaries and whatever, old engravings and stuff like that. And so if you looked at those, you could kind of create sort of stories about these figures. So you're invited to kind of understand beyond what this body is being presented to you on this plane, and really understand that there's depth to her, so, or him. Yeah, thank you.
I think there was a question here. There's a lot about the gaze in your work, right? Like you talk about the gaze, like protecting the woman from a male or colonial gaze with the metal, but also often the people you portray, gaze at you very directly. Is that something you think about?
Yeah, I mean, and it's curious you say that they're gazing, because I would say the majority of the works, I mean, I noticed that the skill is, there's maybe like, I can count on my hand, or maybe both hands, of the times that I actually have pupils in their eyes. And that's usually when they're trying to looking askance or giving someone a snarky eye or something. But yeah, again, this kind of having them, you know, somewhere between our physical world and the spirit world, and, you know, the eyes being a locale for spirits to come and go and stuff like that. So yeah, and that's one of the things that changes as I get older. That definition of why no pupils changes, but that's what it is today. Yeah.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, whenever you're, I guess, sourcing materials for your sculptures, especially when you're looking for when you've been looking for material like, you know, tin ceiling panels and the like, do you ever find yourself trying to keep an eye out for something like, I don't know, oh, maybe like you're looking for ceiling pieces with, say, like a greenish patina or something like that, or that it's rusting a certain way because you like that look and you want to incorporate that into your sculpture? Is that something you're always on the lookout for, or is it more like you see it on the street and you're just, you know, and you just decide, oh, I just like this in the moment. I just like the way this looks in the moment, and I'll try and incorporate it into my work at a later point.
I try not to be too specific at the gifts I find, in demands of them. And it's funny, I remember one day I had an idea for a piece for a door, and so I was walking home from my studio in Brooklyn, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to take the long way around, and there was that door. So, you know, I kind of also have the understanding of the divine, and Leslie's nodding because we all do a lot of junking, and we find what we're looking for, even though we don't know what it is. But sometimes, because, like, you know, these sort of built-in divination rods, they can, like, lead you down Carroll Road or Union, Co-op Union. So, yeah, I try not to, and, you know, sometimes, and I gather a lot of stuff that doesn't feel like it's going to, you know, hit the spot. And maybe it will, and maybe it won't. Sometimes I take stuff over to my mom's, or sometimes I donate stuff to my sister. We do a little bit of exchanging. We have an all points bulletin when we go to the flea market as to what we're looking for. Yeah, and that's also kind of a lovely sort of way of supporting each other in terms of finding stuff.
Have you done anything with these shears you mentioned in the video?
I have, actually, the last show, and it was a piece that was kind of talking about hair straightening products, and how, of course, we all knew it burned the hell out of your head, but now we also know that beyond that is giving women uterine cancer. And so it's a piece called Stubborn and Kinky. I'm looking for Kimberly. And so she is basically, she's wearing a girdle of shears, and she's basically cut all of her hair down to the quick. And as you know, freeing herself of the poisoning that we have been talked into to kind of achieve this Anglification of who we, you know, of being black. And so, is that a word? Yeah, it's a good one.
It is now.
But yeah, but it took a long time, and I think, yeah, I'd been collecting. I had brought those shears, I had packed them up from Brooklyn and moved them here in 1995. So it took a while, right? It's almost, yeah, math, almost 30 years. And I found a good home? Oh, good, great. So yeah, so just be persistent.
Yes, well, it takes a while for the material to manifest. It's,
you know, and I put them in pieces and took them off, and yeah, so you just never know. But
so I guess you never throw away anything now.
I'm trying. Encouragement from the homestead that I'm trying not to drag too much stuff home.
I think we had a question here.
We have one from online.
Oh, from online. Sorry, I forgot to ask you about we have quite
we have a
big
couple
online
from online.
presence.
This one's very technical. I would like to ask, how do you add the copper and other materials to the wood, please? Part 1. And 2, have you ever used clay?
So 1, you saw me hammering that in. So, you know, it's kind of like quilt making, and it's kind of a fun process. A lot of times India or Angie are doing that for me in the studio. And I like it. I don't know if you all like it, but it's kind of rhythmic and I don't want to say mindless, but you kind of get sort of absorbed into it. So that's how the copper and ceiling tin is put on, just by one nail at a time. And then clay. I did a clay head because I was making the mold for blowing glass, and we fired it and it blew up, but we glued it back together. And I am now, like I said, looking to work with my daughter and collaborate with my daughter in creating some clay pieces that are meant to look like sugar pieces, which also goes back to the GRI and that incredible show that they put on, Edible Monument that Marcia Reed put together, and these incredible, crazy sculptures made out of sugar and these displays made out of sugar, which of course was a huge source for wealth for the United States and for France and England, from the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved black bodies, and how these displays were basically, they would just put sugar on the table. It's like, yeah, we're so rich, we've got all this sugar. And so I'm creating a series of pieces that are kind of looking at those traditions and turning them on their heads. And those will be in clay, because if I make them out of sugar, conservators would be really pissed off at me. Although I'm tempted to make some out of sugar so we can just like eat them.
Was that ever like growing up in a household with artists and a conservator? Was there ever any tension, or was it always experiment as much as you want?
I think he understood better than anyone, because he came out of, a ceramic thing, and, the fragility, and his were slipware, so they're extremely fragile. I've got many beautiful pieces with many a chip in them and stuff like that. But no, I don't think, but he would always try and point out, like, yeah, if you do this on that, or, we'd get pieces in and say, yeah, this, Pollock is falling off the piece of paper it was painted on because the enamel paint is shrinking and the paper is not going anywhere. And, you're welcome to make these things. They're worth millions of dollars, but you should know that every once in a while you're going to have little scraps of enamel at the bottom of the frame. So,
Is there any other questions either in the room or on Zoom? One on Zoom.
Oh, Leslie. Yeah, I don't need a microphone. I think I can project. So you want to tell everybody about like some of your public arts statues, sculptures that are now recently unveiled, and also your new upcoming gallery show? Sure, thanks. Yeah, so we talked about Salon. I am working, and we got Jill Moniz in the audience, and a couple pieces, one for Kids Space, which is the Kids Museum in Pasadena, and Destination Crenshaw, which has been a long journey, but we are very excited. It's coming together soon. The piece is cast. I have a piece at the Joslin Museum that we just installed 2 weeks ago, and will be, the museum will be opening soon. And the Lorraine Hansberry piece that I made as part of a group to raise funds for women and non-binaries, playwrights, and people in the theater outside of actors, I think, to raise funds for them to help them finish their schooling and finish their projects. And so that was a piece that was traveling, is now just permanently installed at Navy Pier. So. Freedom, oh, that. Thank you, Maddie. This is part of her job to keep me on track. Yeah, and then the Equal Justice Initiative. Yes, initiative, by Brian Stevenson in Montgomery, Alabama. They just opened this incredible sculpture park, of which one of my pieces is there now. So that was really, really exciting. Oh, and Hollywood Park.
Well, one thing I've been learning about you, Alison, is that you're very modest, and you clearly need a team of people to constantly remind you of all your accomplishments.
Thank you. I love my family. It's like a little nepotism support there. It's just like, go for it. We try to support each other, but yeah.
It's lovely. Oh, hang on. we're going to take a question from Zoom. So we're Zoom people, you're here in spirits. We don't want to forget you, and then we'll get back
I
to
don't
you.
want to wear our audience out either, but whatever you feel is good.
In your inspired multi-layer artwork, there is the feeling of an implied narrative. Is there a poet or a writer you might consider as a companion in words to your visuals?
I've worked with a number of poets, actually. I just met with one today, Lynn Thompson, who was Los Angeles Poet Laureate, who's going to Paris on Saturday to be part of the Jouet Poétique. But also I've worked with Harriet Mullins, who is a LA native, Evie Shockley. I think my first collaboration with a poet was Erica Hunt, whose daughter is now an amazing filmmaker. So I really love that, and I think as growing up and writing poems that, in high school and then burning them because they were so horrific and so vulnerable and all of that, I love that we found Maddie's diary and we're like, oh my God, look at these poems, blackmail. But, I always felt really insecure with wordsmithing, and so I really love it when I can collaborate with poets. And I think I met Evie Shockley because I went to Vermont Studio Center, and we had never met, and she got up on stage, and she didn't even know I was in the audience, and she read this poem that was an ephastic for one of my pieces. And so it was really like, whoa, this is so great. And so, yeah, I love that exchange between artists and poets and this sort of kind of swapping and forming each other. And she and I have gone back and forth and done a number of collaborations between broadsides, and most recently a piece with Arian Press that was to raise funds for Brigitte, which is an organization that provides funds for women needing abortions in states where abortions have been illegal or created very difficult to do that. And so, so those are also nice sort of collaborations when we can kind of have the work go out there and do something other than just sit on someone's wall.
And you're an avid reader. I mean, you have a huge personal library. I think when I visited you for the oral history, you were reading The Old Drift. We talked about the Octavia Butler. Like, you're constantly reading, and clearly you're an avid student of history, right? Because all these historical events and characters make their way into your work, right?
Well, I think that's what's really exciting. The other thing that's really exciting about working is the research. And like this whole project, I just bought all these books on Marie Antoinette, and it's like, who I never would have gotten any more than 2 minutes of my time, but to kind of see all the darkness behind all that wealth is really interesting all of a sudden. So, I love to read. And then I guess that's the other thing that we just finished with Arian Press was we did a artist edition of Kindred. So that's out there if anyone wants to spend a lot of money on a really beautiful book. And I should say that Arian Press is, I think, the only press in the United States that does book publishing by hand from beginning to end. So they actually cast their own type. So they cast the type. They don't make the paper, but they have the paper, and all the pieces are hand sewn. It's really incredible. So I was really honored to be able to work with them, and honored to kind of put Kindred out there in a form that I hope Octavia approves of.
Thank you. And I think I can speak for all my colleagues at the GRI, at the Research Institute. So we love it when artists come and research our collections and get inspirations from the collections. And all of you are also very welcome anytime to consult them.
Fantastic.
So,
you regret it you said that, because I already have plans on talking to you and you and you. Okay.
That's wonderful. There was a question from... That was my question. Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, good.
Wow. All right.
You're lucky. That was an easy one.
All right. That was easy.
I think that's...
Any other questions from the audience?
I think people want refreshments.
Well, maybe it's time for a glass of wine and a little or water or whatever. All right. Well, Alison, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you.